Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another episode of Throwdown Thursday, where I calmly, dispassionately watch a video by a fellow booktuber and then make a response video in which I demonstrate that they are wrong about literally everything, literally all the time. OMG. And when we're talking about a video that I'm going to think is wrong on everything, naturally the name Michael Knipp comes up. He is another booktuber. He's terrific, absolutely fantastic. You will be beguiled by the sheer enthusiasm that he brings to the camera every time he makes a video. He recently had a bit of a hiatus. I assumed from some of the flapdoodle that had come out of his pie hole in previous videos that his hiatus was taking the form of long soul searching, perhaps climbing a mountain somewhere, sitting in a lotus position, meditating on how absolutely wrong he is about absolutely everything. But no, no, if anything, he did just the opposite. He must have gone to some sort of ashram for wrongness, because he came back out of the gate storming with a video that is exponentially wronger than any of the wrong videos he had made before. The main wrong video he had made before was his claim that there's no such thing as objectivity in book reviewing, and by easy extension that therefore book reviewing shouldn't be trusted. That reviewing a book is actually impossible, that it's all just the author's opinion, that phrase that I've heard so many times in my life, well, it's all just subjective anyway. Naturally, I seethed when I saw that video all those weeks ago. Naturally, I looked at the screen and said out loud what I always say when somebody says the tagline, "It's all subjective anyway." Why don't you pick on somebody else's profession? Because as some of you may not know, I am a professional book critic. The dog food and mega stuff Oreos that come into Hyde Cottage are brought here on the proceeds of me being objectively correct about books that I review. If I were bad at my job, I wouldn't get paid. But Michael Knipp is saying that that is not possible. And I vented and I ranted on dog walks out to the sun and the stars and whatnot. And then Michael Knipp went away. And I thought, okay, he's rethinking his past sins. But he came back with a new video. I will link to it down below. You just have to subscribe to this kid. You just have to watch him. Even if you don't agree with anything he says, you're going to love disagreeing with him. And the title of this new video, prepare yourself, is "Popularity is the Only Objective Standard." How popular something is the only objective standard. That's the only thing you can actually say, is how popular something is. You can't say how good it is, because that's all subjective. You can't say how bad it is, because that's all subjective. But you can definitely tell how popular it is. I can hear objections screaming from some of you already, which is, no, that's completely wrong. How popular something is almost always just a yardstick of how popular it is. Popularity feeds into itself. It's not an objective measure stick of anything. But Michael makes that a video along those lines. He wants to say, hear him out. And I think you should. You should hear him out. He repeats again, there is no such thing as an objective review. He repeats that slander on my profession again in this video. And then he goes on to discuss all the different measurements we would use to estimate a book and how they are all at heart subjective except popularity, which is visible and measurable. And that prompted Joe at Average Joe's Library to make a sort of a discussion video of his own, something like this, only without all the vile and vitriol. He makes a video of his own called "Can Objectivity Be Found in Book Lists?" So where Michael Knipp was going after my profession, Joe is going after me specifically. I make the definitive year-end book list of the best and worst books of every year. I've been doing it for a very long time. It will be appearing in December, day by day, one day for each of the genres in which I read, in which I survey all of the reading that I have done in 2021 in those genres and tell you the best and worst books in those genres. There's romance and mystery and science fiction, historical fiction, debut fiction. There's literature and translation, reprints, fiction, history, biography, nature, science, kids, young adult. And there's also worst fiction and worst nonfiction. And Joe is clearly he was not thinking about me specifically, obviously, because at one point in his video, he just offhandedly says that critics aren't people. I'm a people. When he said that in his video, I cracked up because all I could think of were all of the dog videos I've seen on YouTube where some human says about their dog, he thinks he's a people. I felt directly attacked. I'm a people? That point is a little bit debatable. If you go for, does he have a steady blood type? What's his standing body temperature? Or how fast does he heal from major injury? Then maybe you could make a case that I'm only borderline. But one way or another, I could state for a fact, having known quite a few of them, the critics are people. And in the course of his video, Joe, it's fascinating. I'll link to his video as well. This is not a Throwdown Thursday at Joe. This is a Throwdown Thursday at the Prince of Evil, Michael Knipp. But I'm including, Joe is sort of a collateral damage of the Throwdown. I'll leave a link to his video down below, where in his video, he tries to come up with metrics in order to create a kind of algorithm for how good a book is. Something that takes humans out of the equation completely. Something you can just plug in variables and come up with a rating for every book. And I want you to watch this video because he put a lot of thought into it, and it is fascinating. But I ask you, once you're done watching his video, any of you out there, anyone at all, would you ever take a recommendation that came to you by means of that or any other kind of algorithm? Would it ever happen? No. Not in a million years. Not least of which because some of the elements that he chooses to plug in instead, one of which is book prizes, are every bit as subjective as he thinks the book reviews that he has dismissed are. Good Lord, book prizes? No, there's the main objection that I want to make here is to Michael Knipp, and I want to, of course, I'm dismissing the idea that I'm not dismissing the idea on the surface, on the demonic level. I'm not dismissing the idea that popularity is an objective barometer of a kind. Popularity can't be faked, no matter how many Republican senators and congressmen try to by gaming the New York Times bestseller list, the Amazon bestseller list. They'll have a staff member go out to 10 stores, buy a whole pallet full of books. Those ruses, those lies, those schemes are always brought to light. And that is someone trying to fake popularity. But popularity in one sense is objective, at least on a visual level. You can see that something is more popular than another, right? If you go over to Goodreads, which is the locus here of a lot of this kind of discussion, and as it should be. I don't mean that in a scornful way or a dismissive way at all. Goodreads is where the readers are. I ought to be a lot more present on Goodreads than I am. I understand it's where the readers are. So if you go over to Goodreads, it's easy to tell that 100 Years of Solitude is a million times more popular than Accidentally in Love. It's easy to tell which books are more popular than others. I would argue the whole objectivity term in the sense that I'm not sure that any of the building blocks of popularity are all that objective. There's in fact a deeply subjective, almost psychotic element involved in what we're talking about here. When we're talking about popularity, we're talking about the madness of crowds, about mob behavior, which has been studied extensively and is not rational. It is not objective in any way. And you can't talk about popularity without talking, in some sense, about mob thinking. But that's not the main throwdown here. The main throwdown is long overdue, and that's this whole business of there being no objectivity in book reviewing. First of all, I want to draw attention to the fact that this is a lot like the confusion that often arises in popular discussions of science, where in popular parlance, theory means one thing. It means an informed guess. And in scientific parlance, theory means something completely different. It is essentially science's way of saying this is, barring an upheaval of everything that's known in every branch of knowledge, this is an established fact. The germ theory of disease, the theory of gravitation. We call it a theory, and opponents of science, of which there are plenty in my country, will say, well, it's just a theory, so you obviously don't care about it all that much. You obviously can't prove it. Because the word has two different meanings, one in one sphere and one in the other. I would argue that something similar is going on with the whole meaning of objectivity here. And I think that disconnect between the two different kinds of meaning might be what's informing Joe's idea that if it's objective, he should be able to prove it with numbers. I would prefer that we really talk about what we're talking about here instead of fumbling over the two different meanings of the word objective. I think I would prefer it if, when we're talking about book reviewing, we switch to authoritative and not objective. Both Michael and Joe seem to be demonizing, at least to a certain extent, any kind of subjectivity in someone's reading experience. That if there's any subjective element involved, then what comes out of that is not reliable. And that absolutely is not true. That absolutely is not true. I would say that on a lot of levels, objective works in both cases. But when it comes to book reviewing, there is very much, when Michael says that no book reviewer is objective, it seems to me like he is trying to say no book reviewer is authoritative, and that isn't true. Book reviewers, some of them, have read 1,000,000 times more than you have on exactly this kind of thing. They've seen variations on whatever kind of thing you're talking about: military history, spiritual biography, genre fiction. They've seen all the variations on that 1,000,000 times, as opposed to the number of times you have seen variations on those things, which, if I think Michael Knipp just celebrated his 15th birthday, which means that when it comes to subjects like that, he has read maybe 3 examples in his life. Imagine how a book critic is going to feel. Let's say a book critic in their, I don't know, 6th, 7th, or 8th decade is going to, imagine what they're going to think when someone Michael Knipp's age says it's impossible for you to be objective about a book, so your review is just subjective, whatever that means. Well, okay, how subjective is it? If we're talking about military science fiction, a new novel of military science fiction, and I have read that critic, let's say, has read all the military science fiction that comes before it, and a new reader has read none. Whose review would you rather read? Which review will be better? Which review will be more authoritative? There's no doubt. None whatsoever. I know we don't like to think that. We like to think of reading as sort of a pro-am, open invitation type thing, but it's a skill like anything else. And if you do a huge amount of it, you'll get better at it. How can we say otherwise? How can we possibly say otherwise? You are still absolutely entitled to your own opinions. Absolutely you are. No one can possibly tell you whether or not you should like a book. But someone can certainly tell you whether or not a book is good. And according to Michael and also Joe's videos, no one can tell you whether or not a book is any good. It's all subjective. Well, okay, if that's true, then I have 3 questions for Michael Knipp. Question number 1, the first book that you wrote when you were 8, when you were 5, when you were 3, and you were burbling a story about a magic giant who farts Hershey's Kisses or whatever, and you didn't have any idea what the alphabet was, you couldn't write on your own, but let's say a parent or a grandparent was tremendously impressed by your imagination, which has since apparently deserted you, and they decided, isn't this wonderful, little Mikey's coming up with a book, I'll write it for him. I'll sit him on my lap and I'll write out the adventures that he is saying. And let's say that relative did that, wrote out the adventures, read everything back to you so that you could sort of quasi-correct it, so that you had a book. Maybe it's pressed in your family photo album as Mikey's first book. Would you say, I'm asking Michael Knipp now, all 15 years old, would you say that book is good? No, you would not. You would say it is not good. Would you recommend that book to someone who doesn't know you and therefore won't have any sentimental value in reading it? No, you wouldn't. My second question. Let's talk about xenophobic, sexist, race-baiting, red-baiting Tom Clancy, the author of The Hunt for Red October. Let's pick one of his later, extremely bloated 1,000-page books. Would you say that that's good? If you read it, would you say that it's good? I bet you would. I know Michael in his video makes a sidelong glance at the idea that if you push him, he will defend the prose of Stephanie Meyer. The writing of Stephanie Meyer is not defendable. And he knows it. That's the reason that he brought it up, as sort of the ne plus ultra extreme example of something that you could defend only on the grounds of popularity. I don't believe Michael is very clear from, I've watched all of his videos, he's very clear on principles of good and bad writing. How he could get those principles thinking the way he does this flapdoodle about no such thing as objectivity in book reviewing, I don't know, but we'll get to that. I have listened to his videos on the craft of writing. I don't believe that he could defend the writing of Stephanie Meyer or Tom Clancy or a million other people I could name. He could certainly defend them on the grounds of whether or not you enjoy them, and so could I. If I heard someone mocking someone for enjoying Tom Clancy, I'd be the first person to pounce on them, even though I raised a glass in cheer when Tom Clancy popped his clogs and voyaged on to hell. I would be the first person to pounce on the snob that said you shouldn't enjoy him. You can enjoy anything you want. There's no wrong way to do this. Your enjoyment comes first. I might, if I knew you well as a friend, I might say, well, okay, but you can add to your enjoyment. You can sharpen it. You can broaden it. But I certainly would never say, no, you're not allowed to enjoy this thing. And I don't believe that Michael would either. So that's my second question. Is that prose good? Are those books good? I believe Michael's answer would be an unhesitating no. And then there's the third question. Would you, Michael Knipp, under any circumstances whatsoever, including a pointed rifle at your face, read a romance novel? No, you would not. Now, that makes you a book snob, but what's the reason why you wouldn't do it? Because you have long since become convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond any kind of movement, you are a jihadist zealot on the subject. You cannot be convinced otherwise. You have long since become completely convinced that romance novels are bad. Not just that you wouldn't enjoy them, but that they're bad. If your answer to all three of these questions is no, and allow me to cut to the chase here, your answer to all three of these questions is no, then you are existing on a sliding scale in which it is possible to objectively examine the worth of a book. You exist already in the world of book reviews that are not just subjective. It's all just subjective. You already exist on that spectrum. You're just trying to deny it. And the only reason that I'm getting very contentious on this Throwdown Thursday is because it's my profession. It is entirely possible to read a book, write a review, and say this book is bad. It's entirely possible to do that. That is not subjective. It is entirely possible to say this author only sketches at the opening of this plot. Certain details of the plot are never made clear in the entire course of 250 pages. Are you going to say that's good? If you're going to say that's good, or that I'm saying it's bad is subjective, then you are turning your back on 15,000 years of storytelling. You're not going to say that that is value neutral. You're going to say that's bad storytelling. This author, the author of the novel in question, introduces a major character, spends almost all of chapter 2 talking about them, and then in chapter 4 they wander off stage and are never heard from again. So was that chapter 2 a waste of the reader's time? Yes, it was. Objectively, yes, it was. It doesn't serve any other purpose. You can highfalutin twist it all you like. That is just objectively a mistake. That's why writing workshops exist. That's why editors exist, because writers make mistakes. In the 21st century, they sue if you point them out. They don't fix them. Which means we get plenty of novels that act as object examples of what I'm talking about. That these things can be objectively assessed. Does this character talk like a real person? If you introduce a character who's had only high school education, lives in a small town in a rural Midwestern small town, and works in an automotive repair shop, maybe has alcoholic parents, comes from a broken home, has never been schooled, doesn't read, if that character opens their mouth and starts talking like an Oxford Don, then you as an author have objectively made a mistake. You can't explain it. It can't be explained in the continuity of the story, and therefore it is simply wrong. It is objectively wrong. And I would argue, based on my three questions, that sliding scale of actual objective assessment can be pushed way, way up. It doesn't just exist in the easy end of the pool. It can be pushed way to the top so that you can actually start to say, take an author who is just fantastic, a truly great author, Marilynne Robinson. When you push that barometer way up to the other end of the spectrum, you can actually get to the point where you are differentiating which of Marilynne Robinson's great novels is greater than the other. And you'll still be doing it objectively. The minute you admit that the scale exists, and you do, then the scale goes everywhere. It goes in all directions. And what gets it way up here? The authority of the reviewer, the experience of the reviewer, the reader, whoever it is. The experience of the reader gets it way up there. So if you're talking about are some reviews not authoritative, then we could talk. But what was the line again? There's no such thing as an objective review? Again, I will finish this Throwdown Thursday by saying, go pick on somebody else's profession, why don't you? So there you go. I will leave links to both of those videos down below. Of course, I want to know what you think. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'm feeling out contended. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.